Dear chosen ones, every great awakening begins with a betrayal you were never meant to survive. You didn't just stumble into another difficult season or walk through random chaos disguised as bad luck. You walked straight into revelation dressed as warfare. What you uncovered wasn't coincidence. It was a full-scale demonic plot, written, rehearsed, and timed to collapse you before you ever realized who you were becoming. Here's the truth most people don't want to hear. Spiritual warfare doesn't announce itself with dramatic signs or cosmic warnings. It shows up wearing your friend's smile, your colleague's concern, your family member's advice. It echoes in your own doubts at 3 in the morning. The battlefield isn't somewhere distant. It's hidden in routines that look too normal to question, in patterns that seem too familiar to suspect. You weren't paranoid when you started noticing things. You were perceptive. You began seeing the patterns emerge. The sudden chaos right before every breakthrough. The energy shift that happens after you pray. The way peace becomes suspiciously expensive once you start walking in purpose. That's not bad luck or random misfortune. That's backlash. That's spiritual resistance manifesting because you're getting dangerously close to something heaven has been preparing you for all along. At first, you probably thought you were overreacting, didn't you? You tried to rationalize everything. Maybe I'm just exhausted. Maybe I'm imagining patterns where none exist. But here's what you need to understand right now. If this resonates in your spirit, drop the number 333 in the comments below. Hit that like button to amplify this message to other chosen ones who need to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And if you're ready to go deeper, check out the Call to Prosperity in the description. This manual contains 10 spiritual and practical steps to activate financial abundance under divine government. Now let's continue unpacking what you've just discovered about the warfare surrounding your assignment. You weren't imagining anything. You were detecting frequencies that others are spiritually numb to notice. Think of yourself as heaven's undercover operative who accidentally intercepted the enemy's communication. They spent months plotting in secret, coordinating attacks, positioning people. And God let you discover the entire script before the performance even began. That's why your discernment suddenly spiked without warning or explanation. Heaven handed you the blueprint of your opposition. So now it's not just about surviving random attacks anymore. It's about understanding the architecture behind them, the system, the patterns, the strategies they thought you'd never decode. Once you know how the system operates, you're no longer just a target. You become a threat to every invisible hand that ever tried to orchestrate your downfall. Welcome to Revelation. You didn't just expose a plot against your life. You exposed the panic of hell itself. Because when a chosen one wakes up to spiritual intelligence, when they start seeing through dimensional manipulation, entire demonic structures begin to tremble. They lose their camouflage. Their strategies become visible. And visibility is the beginning of their defeat. You're not fighting blind anymore. The plot was never random. It was a calculated reaction to your awakening. You didn't wake up one morning and suddenly find yourself under spiritual attack. The moment your awareness shifted, something ancient stirred against you. The energy around your life changed because your mind stopped functioning on autopilot. You started asking questions instead of accepting narratives, setting boundaries instead of absorbing dysfunction, seeing through manipulation instead of explaining it away. And that alone was enough to trigger a coordinated spiritual reaction. When a chosen one starts to remember their true identity, it sets off an alarm in the unseen realm. Forces that once felt comfortable controlling your trajectory begin to panic. Their disguise no longer works. You stopped being predictable. And to the demonic realm, unpredictability equals rebellion against their system. The plot against you was never emotional. It was strategic, calculated, methodical. The forces opposing you studied your patterns, analyzed your weaknesses, memorized your old habits. They knew exactly which distractions to send at which times, which people to position in your path, which memories to resurrect just to slow your momentum. They had a formula, a system designed specifically for who you used to be. But what they didn't calculate was your evolution. They underestimated the quiet transformation happening in your spirit while they were still studying your old version. Every attack they launched was programmed for the person you used to be. The one who doubted themselves constantly. The one who always tried to explain their worth to people who couldn't see it. The one who still needed external validation to feel purposeful. What they didn't expect was your awakening to divine intelligence. You began to understand that not every loss was designed to destroy you. Some losses were coded as lessons, teachings disguised as setbacks, strategic removals that taught you how to operate beyond emotional control. You started seeing the difference between what was taken and what was released, between who left and who was removed for your protection. The demonic plot depended entirely on your ignorance, on your inability to see the patterns, on your willingness to accept surface explanations for deep spiritual warfare. But when light entered your understanding, when revelation pierced through the fog, their whole system of influence began to collapse. They had no backup strategy because they never imagined you would rise in awareness this quickly. They underestimated divine timing. They didn't attack you because of what you were doing. They attacked you because of what you were about to realize. You were getting dangerously close to the truth that your power doesn't come from effort, but from alignment. You started operating from divine timing instead of fear-based reaction. You stopped forcing outcomes and started recognizing signals. That shift terrified them more than any prayer or declaration ever could. When your spirit woke up, you became unprogrammable, unreachable through old methods, immune to manipulations that used to work perfectly. You stopped running from warfare and started decoding it, studying it, understanding its language. You didn't just survive the plot. Your awakening exposed it, disarmed it, and turned their entire strategy into your testimony, into evidence of divine protection operating in real time. The war was spiritual, but camouflaged as psychological chaos. The attack against you didn't arrive with clear signs or dramatic supernatural events. It came disguised as confusion, mental fog, emotional turbulence that seemed to have no source. That's how real spiritual warfare operates. It hides behind emotions, timing, and chaos that appear ordinary until you start paying close attention to the patterns beneath the surface. The enemy couldn't reach your spirit directly because that territory belongs to God alone. So it targeted your perception instead. It wanted to distort how you saw yourself, your purpose, your calling, even your relationship with the divine. That's why you went through those seasons where nothing made sense, where it felt like you were losing your mind, when in truth, you were stepping into a deeper dimension of clarity that your old consciousness couldn't. Artifact 2. Paragraphs 1 to 16. Comprehend or contain. When your spirit began awakening to higher frequencies, your mind became the primary battleground. The warfare wasn't about your physical body or material possessions. It was about your awareness, your consciousness, your ability to perceive truth. The enemy understands something profound. If it can confuse your thoughts, it can delay your destiny indefinitely. It starts subtly and builds gradually. Self-doubt that grows louder each day. exhaustion that feels almost supernatural in its intensity, people around you suddenly changing their behavior without explanation, small inconveniences that multiply until your peace feels completely hijacked. All of this is strategic, coordinated. The goal isn't simply to stress you, it's to make you question what's real and what isn't. Because if you stop trusting your discernment, you stop trusting your divine connection entirely. They call it mental warfare because it operates like static interference, disrupting a clear signal. The more light you carry, the louder the interference becomes. That's why when you were growing spiritually, reading more, praying deeper, your anxiety inexplicably spiked. Your sleep patterns shifted dramatically. You started feeling disconnected from things that once felt completely normal. People you loved, places you enjoyed, routines that used to bring comfort. It wasn't that you were losing balance or mental stability. It was that you were being unplugged from systems specifically designed to manipulate your mind and keep you functioning at lower frequencies. The chaos was camouflage. The demonic realm thrives in distortion, hoping desperately that you'll label divine transformation as mental breakdown, that you'll medicate what should be celebrated, suppress what should be studied, fear what should be embraced. What you were really experiencing was a systematic dismantling of illusions, layer by layer, belief by belief. Every thought that made you feel unworthy, unseen, inadequate, or hopeless was a foreign voice trying desperately to reclaim territory it once controlled. But through that mental fog and confusion, you began to develop a critical skill. You started recognizing what was actually yours and what wasn't, which thoughts originated from your spirit and which ones were planted. That's when power started returning to you. Not in the form of control over external circumstances, but in the form of awareness, clarity, the ability to separate spiritual interference from inner truth. You stopped believing every thought that entered your consciousness. You started questioning the source, testing the fruit, measuring the frequency. The enemy lost its primary disguise, its ability to masquerade as your own voice. What was designed to destroy your sanity ended up sharpening your discernment to supernatural levels. That's when the war started shifting. The moment you realized confusion wasn't chaos for chaos' sake. It was exposure. It was the lifting of veils. You were being shown what had been operating in the shadows of your mind for years. Decades even. The revelation was uncomfortable but necessary. Because you can't defeat what you can't see. You were being studied like a code they couldn't crack. They watched you, analyzed you, documented your patterns with obsessive attention to detail, how you responded to rejection, how you processed disappointment, where you went when you felt broken, who you called when you needed validation, what time of day you were most vulnerable to doubt. They built an entire profile, a psychological blueprint designed to predict and control your responses. But here's what they didn't account for in their calculations: divine unpredictability. The way God moves in your life doesn't follow patterns the enemy can study or replicate. When heaven decides to shift your trajectory, when the divine hand decides to intervene, all their research becomes instantly obsolete. You stopped responding the way their profile said you would. You zigged when they expected you to zag. You stayed silent when they anticipated an outburst. You became a moving target they could no longer track. Every time they sent a familiar trigger, you responded differently than before. The abandonment that used to devastate you barely registered. The criticism that used to destroy your confidence slid right off. The isolation that used to terrify you became your place of power. They kept pulling the same levers, expecting the same results. but the machinery had changed. You had evolved beyond their system. That's when frustration entered their camp. When spiritual forces realize they can no longer predict or control you, they escalate. They try harder, send bigger attacks, position more people. But escalation isn't strength. It's desperation. It's evidence that their initial strategy failed completely. You weren't just surviving their plot. You were making it irrelevant through transformation. They studied your past. God was preparing your future. And those two timelines don't speak the same language. The warfare intensified because your evolution threatened their entire operation. Not just against you, but against everyone they had successfully kept asleep using the same methods. You became living proof that their system could be decoded and defeated. That awareness was more powerful than their manipulation. That one person waking up could expose tactics they'd used successfully for generations. You weren't just fighting for yourself anymore. You were disrupting an entire infrastructure. Every time you chose differently, you weakened their formula. Every time you saw through another layer, you exposed another strategy. You became the glitch in their matrix, the error in their code. And glitches spread. Errors multiply. One awakened, chosen one starts a cascade that the demonic realm cannot contain or control. That's why they came after you so aggressively. You weren't just escaping. You were teaching others the exit route simply by being yourself. Think about Elijah standing alone against 450 prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. Outnumbered, but not outranked. The priests performed their rituals from morning until evening, cutting themselves, crying out, dancing around their altar. Nothing happened because they were operating in a system that looked powerful, but had no actual authority. Then Elijah prayed one prayer. Fire fell. The false structure collapsed instantly. Authority doesn't need volume or numbers. Your life has become that kind of demonstration. While forces around you performed elaborate schemes, created complex manipulations, positioned multiple people and circumstances, you simply aligned with truth. And truth doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be present. One moment of genuine alignment with the divine carries more power than 1,000 manipulations. That's what they didn't understand about you. They were fighting with complexity. You were operating in simplicity. The more they escalated, the clearer it became that they had already lost. You weren't supposed to decode this. You weren't meant to see the patterns. You definitely weren't expected to understand that warfare isn't about what they do to you. It's about revealing what God has already placed in you. Every attack was designed to bury your identity. Instead, it excavated your purpose. Cleared away everything false until only the real you remained. The you they were actually afraid of all along. Now listen carefully, because this next part is critical for your continued freedom and prosperity. You've uncovered the demonic plot. You've seen through their system. But awareness without action is just information. You need practical steps to walk in the prosperity and divine favor that's been trying to reach you. That's exactly why the call to prosperity exists. This isn't just another book. It's a manual for chosen ones who are ready to activate financial abundance through spiritual and practical alignment. 10 steps that bridge the gap between revelation and manifestation, between seeing your purpose and funding it. The link is in the description and pinned in the first comment. This is your next move, your Artifact 3, paragraphs 1 to 16 strategic advantage in this new season of warfare and wisdom combined. Now let's go deeper into what you've exposed and how to maintain this level of spiritual sight. They used people you trusted as unconscious weapons. This might be the hardest truth to accept. Not everyone who hurt you knew what they were doing. Some people in your life became vessels without ever realizing it. They thought they were just having a bad day, just feeling irritated, just expressing an opinion. But if you pay attention to the timing, you'll see something darker. The criticism came right after you made a major decision. The betrayal happened right before your breakthrough. The abandonment occurred the moment you stepped into new authority. These weren't random emotional reactions. They were spiritually coordinated strikes using people who had access to your life. People you loved. People you trusted. People who claimed they wanted the best for you. The demonic realm is strategic about access points. It can't just attack you directly if you're covered by prayer and divine protection. So it finds open doors. People who are hurt, jealous, spiritually asleep, or emotionally unstable become easy channels. The enemy didn't need permission from them. It just needed their pain, their pride, or their proximity to you. Then it would whisper thoughts that felt like their own, plant suggestions that seemed reasonable, amplify emotions until they acted out of character. You've probably looked back and thought about how certain people completely changed, how someone who used to support you suddenly turned, how a friend who understood you became your biggest critic, how family members who celebrated you started sabotaging you. That wasn't just them. That was something working through them, testing whether their access to your life could be weaponized. And in many cases, it worked until you woke up to the pattern. Here's what made you dangerous to that system. You started recognizing the pattern without becoming bitter toward the people. You understood the difference between the person and the force using them. That level of discernment is rare. Most people either stay blind to spiritual warfare or become paranoid about everyone. You found the narrow path between those two extremes. You saw clearly, but loved wisely. Protected yourself, but didn't close your heart. That's the balance only mature chosen ones can walk. You learn to discern spirits without demonizing people, to set boundaries without building walls, to protect your energy without becoming cold. You stopped giving people power they didn't deserve while still honoring their humanity. That is advanced spiritual warfare. Not fighting people, not exposing them publicly, just quietly closing access points and moving forward with wisdom. No drama, no explanation, just divine strategy in motion. Think about how Joseph handled his brothers after they sold him into slavery. When he had all the power to destroy them, he chose understanding instead. He recognized that what they meant for evil, God turned into positioning. He didn't need revenge because he could see the bigger picture. His betrayal wasn't about him. It was about nations that needed saving through him. Your betrayals worked the same way. They weren't about hurting you. They were about positioning you. Every person who was used against you was actually pushing you toward your real assignment. Away from comfort zones that would have kept you small. Away from relationships that would have drained your calling. Away from opportunities that looked good but would have derailed your destiny. You thought you were losing people. You were actually being strategically relocated by forces that loved you more than you loved yourself in that moment. The warfare wasn't trying to destroy you. It was trying to obstruct your relocation. Every attack was designed to make you stay where you were, to keep you comfortable in dysfunction, to convince you that staying small was safer than stepping into greatness. But something in you refused to accept that narrative. Something deeper than logic or comfort kept pushing you forward despite the warfare. That something was your covenant with heaven, an agreement made before you were born. Discernment became your greatest weapon because it couldn't be manipulated. Once you developed real discernment, you stopped being accessible to emotional warfare. You could feel when something was off before anything was said. You could sense when someone's energy had shifted before they acted. You started trusting those inner signals instead of overriding them with logic or politeness. That trust in your spiritual senses became your primary defense system. Discernment doesn't shout. It whispers. It's that quiet knowing that something isn't right, even when everything looks fine on the surface. It's the feeling you get when someone smiles, but their energy says something completely different. It's the unease you feel in certain spaces, even though you can't explain why. Most people ignore those signals because they can't prove them. You learned to honor them because you realized they were saving your life repeatedly. Every time you listened to that inner knowing, you avoided a trap. Every time you trusted that gut feeling over someone's words, you sidestepped manipulation. The warfare lost its primary access point because you stopped being polite at the expense of your peace. You stopped explaining away red flags because you didn't want to seem judgmental. You gave yourself permission to protect your energy without needing everyone to understand why. That's when things started shifting rapidly in your favor, not because you became aggressive or started fighting back, but because you became unreachable through old methods. You closed doors that had been open for years. You stopped entertaining conversations that drained you. You removed yourself from environments that dimmed your light. No announcements, no confrontations. Just quiet, decisive movement, guided by discernment that couldn't be argued with or explained away. The more they attacked, the more their contract expired. Every attack they launched had a spiritual expiration date they didn't know about. In the realm of the spirit, authority is based on permission, not power, not volume, not numbers, not fear. Every demonic operation that came against you was sustained by borrowed permission, often granted through ignorance, unhealed pain, unforgiveness, or emotional openness you weren't aware of. But the moment you began healing those areas, forgiving strategically, detaching from toxic patterns, you unknowingly revoked their legal right to interfere. That's the part most believers never understand. Hell doesn't function purely by power. It functions by access, by open doors, by unhealed wounds it can exploit. When access is systematically denied through healing and wisdom, the attack collapses under its own weight. Not because you fought harder, but because the ground it stood on disappeared. They came at you repeatedly thinking persistence meant dominance. They assumed if they kept attacking, eventually you'd break. But every failed attempt became evidence of your growing immunity. Each trap you escaped made you wiser. Each lie that didn't break you made you stronger. Each setup that fell apart before manifesting proved you were operating under protection they couldn't penetrate. Their strategy weakened with every failure while your authority strengthened. The contract they once used against you was built on your past version. The one still wounded, unaware, reactive, controlled by emotions rather than guided by wisdom. But as you evolved, as you healed, as you grew, those old agreements lost validity. They couldn't renew the lease on territory you no longer lived in spiritually. What once triggered you stopped moving you. What once scared you became irrelevant. That was the ultimate cancellation notice. You didn't just survive their attacks. You legally ended cycles that had haunted your bloodline for generations. Every time you refused to retaliate when you had the right to, you closed a generational loophole. Every time you chose peace over chaos, wisdom over emotion, you unplugged the demonic power source that fed off reactive behavior. They needed your anger, your bitterness, your revenge. When you denied them that fuel, their operation starved. That's why lately you've been feeling lighter. Not because life suddenly got easier or all your problems disappeared, but because your spirit got cleaner. The old contract expired the moment you stopped feeding what once controlled you. This is divine law in motion. When darkness fails to fulfill its assigned purpose, it loses its rights. When the enemy cannot break your faith despite sustained assault, it forfeits the assignment. What once had power to torment you now has to watch you walk in freedom. That's not coincidence or positive thinking. That's spiritual jurisdiction shifting back to where it belongs. You became sovereign again, not through revenge or retaliation, through alignment, through healing, through wisdom that came from warfare itself. You reclaimed your spiritual authority without even fully realizing what you were doing. And that's why things are changing so suddenly now. Why peace feels real again instead of temporary. Why your path feels protected in ways it didn't before. The contract is void. Their time is up. You're finally free. And this time it's permanent because it's rooted in transformation, not temporary victory. You didn't just uncover a plot. You exposed a pattern that's been running for generations. You weren't just uncovering a scheme against your individual life. You were confronting an ancient pattern buried deep within your lineage. The manipulation, the betrayal, the sabotage didn't start with you. It's been running silently through generations of your family, passing itself off as normal life, bad luck, family dysfunction, just how things are in your bloodline. The same betrayals your grandmother experienced, the emotional entanglements your father couldn't escape, the cycles of lack your mother accepted as fate, the silent suffering your ancestors endured without questioning. These were spiritual codes designed to keep your entire bloodline asleep, compliant, and powerless. You just happened to be born awake enough to see it. Your awakening wasn't random chance or good timing. It was an interruption to a centuries-old system that depended entirely on ignorance to survive and perpetuate. When you started questioning family traditions that everyone else accepted, when you began examining generational pain patterns, when you noticed strange cycles that seemed to repeat across generations, failed relationships, sabotaged opportunities, emotional neglect, you were decoding ancestral encryption. You were tracing the fingerprints of a demonic system that thrived in familiarity. It wasn't about one attack or one person or one isolated event. It was about maintaining a pattern of bondage through repetition until it became normal. Expected, accepted. That's how the unseen world keeps its contracts alive and enforceable. Not through overt destruction that people would notice and resist, but through inherited dysfunction, disguised as just how our family is. Just bad luck we've always had. Just struggles everyone goes through. Until you came along and said no more. You broke it. You started noticing what others tolerated without question, healing what others hid in shame, naming what others normalized through silence. That act alone shook centuries of spiritual inertia. Every time you chose awareness over autopilot, you disrupted the script your ancestors followed. Every time you responded differently than your bloodline would have responded, you rewrote destiny. You didn't just overcome personal trauma. You ended a lineage of manipulation that relied on silence and repetition. The same energy that once whispered defeat into your ancestors encountered a different frequency in you. Truth. And truth dissolves illusion at the root no matter how old or established it is. Your journey has never been just about personal growth or individual healing. It's been ancestral liberation happening in real time. You're living proof that curses collapse when consciousness enters the room. When one person wakes up and refuses to continue the pattern, the weight you carried wasn't yours alone. It was accumulated residue of what generations before You couldn't confront, couldn't name, couldn't escape. That's why your life felt heavier than your personal story explained. Why you struggled with things that didn't make logical sense. Why certain patterns kept repeating despite your best efforts. You were carrying spiritual debts you didn't create. Fighting battles that started before you were born. And still, somehow, you broke them. You didn't just survive against impossible odds. You rewrote the prophecy that said your family line would never awaken. That said, your bloodline was cursed to repeat the same cycles forever. What once ran through your family tree, unchecked for generations, now ends with you. You exposed not just a personal plot, but a generational pattern that finally met its expiration date through your awakening. Through your willingness to see what others denied. Everything that happened to you wasn't random chaos or bad luck. It was revelation, strategic exposure. You didn't stumble into warfare accidentally. You were chosen specifically to expose it. What was meant to confuse you ended up confirming your divine rank. Every betrayal, every whisper campaign, every strange pattern of resistance, none of it was simply about attacking you. It was about initiating you into higher levels of spiritual authority and understanding. You were being trained in spiritual intelligence without realizing it, molded through fire to see beyond surface appearances, sharpened through warfare into someone who can detect darkness, even when it hides behind familiar smiles and religious language. You didn't just uncover a demonic plot against your life. You dismantled a structure that had been feeding off silence, repetition, and collective unawareness for generations. Every time you refused to fold under pressure, you advanced the divine timeline. Every time you chose truth over comfort, the illusion lost another layer of control over your lineage. What used to torment you spiritually now reports to you legally. You've outgrown the vibrational contract that once made you accessible to their attacks. You're no longer playing defense or just trying to survive. You've become the defense system itself. Discernment has become your shield, awareness your weapon, and peace, deep, unshakable peace, your greatest retaliation. If this message resonated in your spirit, I need you to do something right now. Drop a comment below sharing what part hit you deepest. Hit that like button so this reaches other chosen ones still trapped in plots they haven't decoded yet. Subscribe, because what's coming next will build on everything you just learned. And if you haven't grabbed the call to prosperity yet, the link is in the description and first pinned comment. 10 spiritual and practical steps to activate the financial abundance that's been waiting for your awakening. For those who've supported through Buy Me a Coffee, thank you. Your contribution elevates the quality and reach of these messages. The link is also in the description if you feel called to support this work. Everything is aligning now. The warfare didn't end. You just rose above its reach through transformation that made their strategies obsolete. You're no longer who they planned against in their schemes and calculations. You've evolved into who heaven always saw, even when you couldn't see it yourself. The enemy didn't just fail in their attempt to destroy you. They accidentally confirmed your identity through the intensity of their assault, because warfare always reveals the level of purpose being protected. That's why your life has never fit the mold. Why you've never been comfortable with normal. Why average has always felt like bondage to you. You were never meant to survive quietly, blending in, accepting limitations. You were meant to expose loudly through your very existence. What they plotted in secret, heaven is turning into public testimony. You've proven that divine favor doesn't just restore what was lost, it reverses the curse and rewrites the bloodline forever. Your journey wasn't punishment for something you did wrong. It was prophecy in motion. Heaven preparing you for assignments that required this exact level of spiritual sight and warfare experience. Now you stand not as victim of attack, but as architect of awakening. You've decoded manipulation, transcended warfare, reclaimed spiritual sovereignty. You carry the receipts of divine vindication, living proof that light doesn't fight darkness. It simply makes it visible until darkness has nowhere left to hide. That's why everything feels different now. Lighter, clearer, more aligned. The storm didn't end or disappear. You just rose above its reach through elevation that came from transformation rather than escape. You own your peace now, not hoping for it, not praying for it, owning it. You own your purpose, your story, your authority. And that story is living proof that what was meant to destroy you was really preparing you to see. God bless you, chosen one. Walk in your authority.